Los Angeles, 2023. In the heart of Echo Park, the night had fallen, with a deceptive calm. The streetlights flickered like old memories, and the air smelled of freshly baked bread. On a small corner, the bakery Sweet Memories, run by 72-year-old Doña Rosa Garcia, remained open. Her hands, though trembling, worked with the dedication of a lifetime. Every concha, every bolillo, was a tribute to her roots and her love for what she did. But that night was unlike any other. From a distance, the rumble of motorcycles shattered the neighborhood's quiet. The noise grew louder, approaching like a threat. Rosa looked up, her heart pounding. The metallic roar stopped right in front of her bakery. The door swung open, and 5 bikers walked in. They wore leather jackets, tattoos covering their bodies, and an attitude that made it clear they hadn't come for bread. "Old lady, we know you make money here. Time to share," growled the leader, a burly man with a scruffy beard named Travis. "Please boys, this place is my life." "I don't have much," Rosa replied, her voice shaking. Travis didn't listen. With a swipe of his hand, he knocked a basket of bread to the floor. The others laughed as they began ransacking the place. At that moment, just a few blocks away, a man was walking calmly toward his motorcycle. He had long hair, a black jacket, and headphones still hanging around his neck after a rock concert at a local club. His name Keanu Reeves. He took a shortcut through the streets, as he often did to avoid traffic, but something made him stop. A different sound, broken glass, raised voices. He looked toward the bakery and approached cautiously. Peering through the window, he saw the scene. 5 men, surrounding an elderly woman. Without a word, he gently pushed the door open. "Hey," he said in a firm, calm voice, "I don't think that's the right way to treat a lady." The 5 bikers turned immediately, startled by the interruption. Travis squinted, trying to recognize the man who had entered so calmly. Keanu walked slowly toward the counter, showing no fear, his boots echoing on the worn wooden floor. His presence carried a strange weight, a mix of serenity and contained danger. "Who the hell are you?" spat one of the bikers, a tall guy with chains dangling from his jacket. Keanu didn't answer. He just took another step forward, keeping his gaze fixed on Travis. Rosa, still trembling, watched him with a mix of hope and confusion. There was something about this man, something familiar. Travis laughed arrogantly. "Look at this, a movie hero playing vigilante, here to save the day, Hollywood." The others laughed, but Keanu's expression didn't change. He remained calm in a way that unsettled them. "Why don't you leave this as it is and walk away?" he finally said with a slight smile, but a voice so firm it silenced the room for a second. Travis stepped forward, trying to intimidate. "Or what? You gonna teach us some kung fu?" he sneered. One of his men, a burly guy with a skull tattoo on his neck, reached for a cookie jar, trying to assert dominance, but before he could touch it, Keanu moved. It wasn't a strike, he just placed his hand over the man's, firm, unyielding. The pressure was enough to freeze the biker. His fingers began to tremble, unable to resist. Travis frowned. "What the hell?" Keanu released the man's hand gently but kept his gaze steady. "Take your friends and leave. You don't want to do this." The youngest of the group, a guy no older than 20 named Ryan, hesitated. He looked at Keanu, then at Rosa. Something stirred inside him. His mother also ran a small business. This scene felt too familiar, but Travis wasn't ready to back down. He pulled out a knife. The metallic glint of the blade briefly illuminated Travis's face under the bakery's dim light. Rosa let out a stifled scream. The other bikers tensed, stepping back. But Keanu didn't move. He didn't even blink. His gaze remained locked on the leader's eyes, without a trace of fear, as if he already knew what would happen. "Put that down," he said with such absolute calm it didn't sound like a warning, but an inevitable truth. Travis hesitated, just for a second, but in that moment, everything changed. Something in the way Keanu looked at him, in that relentless serenity, stirred something inside him. It was as if the man in front of him could see beyond his facade, beyond the rage, and find the scared boy he once was. It made him feel exposed. Then, From afar the sound of sirens began to seep through Echo Park's empty streets. Ryan, the youngest, was the first to move. He took a step back. Then, another. "Travis, let's go," he said quietly. The others looked at him, and for the first time, their defiance faded. Like dominoes, they began to retreat. Travis clenched the knife, gritting his teeth, staring at Keanu with a mix of hatred and defeat. But finally, he lowered the weapon, not because he wanted to, because he knew he had no other choice. Keanu didn't move, he didn't speak, he just watched as the gang slowly filed out, one by one, until the door closed and the roar of their motorcycles faded into the distance. Rosa exhaled the breath she'd been holding, her legs shook. "Son," she whispered, her eyes filled with tears. Keanu turned to her and smiled softly. "It's okay," she nodded, wiping her face with her sweater sleeve. She looked at the floor, where the bread still lay scattered like the remnants of a battle. Keanu knelt silently and began picking it up. "You don't have to do that, son," Rosa murmured, her voice breaking with emotion. Keanu looked up with a serene smile, holding a broken concha in his hands. "But I want to." In that moment, Rosa understood that this man hadn't just saved her bakery, he had saved something much deeper, her faith, in kindness, in humanity, in the fact that there were still people willing to step in without expecting anything in return. The bakery was silent again, but it wasn't the same silence as before. It had changed. It was a warm silence, almost sacred, as if the place knew it had just witnessed something extraordinary. Rosa leaned against the counter, watching Keanu as he patiently gathered the bread. His movements were slow, as if he had all the time in the world. "I don't understand," she finally said, her voice barely audible. Keanu looked, his hands dusty with flour, his boots covered in crumbs, his jacket wrinkled. "What?" he asked. "Why did you care? Why did you come in?" For a moment, she thought he'd say something she'd heard 1,000 times. "Because it was the right thing, or because I couldn't stand by." But Keanu's answer was different, laden with a sincerity that disarmed her. "Because I know what it's like to lose everything." A shiver ran down her spine. In his tone was a sadness that needed no explanation. It was the kind of pain that isn't spoken of, that's carried in silence for years. She didn't ask more. There was no need. Keanu stood, carefully placed the bread on the counter, and looked around. The broken glass, the overturned tables, the dirty footprints on the floor. "Do you have family nearby?" he asked gently. Rosa smiled, but with a painful nostalgia. "They're all far away, or already gone." Keanu nodded in understanding. His dark eyes reflected a similar loneliness. Then, without warning, he took off his jacket and hung it on the back of a chair. "Where's the broom?" Rosa blinked, confused by the question. "The broom?" Keanu nodded, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Yeah, we need to clean up this mess." She opened her mouth to protest but stopped, not because it seemed strange for a movie star to sweep her bakery, but because in Keanu's eyes, she didn't see pity or condescension. She saw need, a deep need to be present, to help, to heal, with simple gestures. With a slight nod, Rosa pointed to a door at the back. "It's over there by the sink." Keanu smiled kindly and headed to the back. When he returned with the broom, he began sweeping without a word. Broken glass, shattered cookies, dust, crumbs. Each movement was meticulous, as if cleaning were part of an invisible ritual. Rosa watched in silence, unsure what to say. The scene was as surreal as it was intimate. Time seemed to slow down. When Keanu finished, he wiped his hands on Rosa's apron. Without thinking, she let out an unexpected laugh, brief but bright, the first of the night. "Oh, son, now you really look like a baker." Keanu laughed with her. "Maybe it's my new calling." Rosa shook her head, amused. Then she looked at him, and her expression was a mix of gratitude, tenderness, and something deeper she couldn't yet name. "Thank you," she whispered. Keanu looked at her seriously, making sure she was truly okay. "You're welcome." The clock on the wall read 2 a.m. The city slept, but inside sweet memories, time seemed to have frozen in a sacred moment. "Do you have coffee?" he asked suddenly. Rosa blinked in surprise. "Coffee at this hour?" Keanu smiled. Coffee, and a story. She understood immediately. He hadn't just come to save her. He'd come to listen, to share. Rosa didn't say another word. She turned slowly, and began making the coffee. The warm aroma of the beans filled the small space like a soothing caress. She poured 2 cups with careful hands, as if each gesture offered more than just a drink. It offered companionship. They sat at a table by the window. Outside, Echo Park slept, but inside the bakery felt more alive than ever. The dim light reflected their faces, marked by different stories but connected by an unrepeatable moment. Rosa held the cup between her hands. "My husband," she began, pausing. Her eyes clouded. Keanu said nothing. He just watched her, attentive, unhurried. "Carlos," she continued, "when we came here from Mexico we had nothing, just dreams. This bakery was our beginning, our way of saying we can do this, even far from home." She took a sip of coffee, as if needing courage to go on. "No matter what happened outside, this place was our refuge. We helped each other. We were a team." Keanu nodded silently, feeling each word strike something inside him that he too knew well. "One day, he just didn't come back. A stupid accident. And she paused for a long time. "I wasn't ready to be alone." Rosa's voice broke. It wasn't the cry of a weak woman. It was the confession of someone who had endured too much. Keanu leaned forward slightly, not interrupting. "And here I am," Rosa said, looking at her cup. "Years later, surviving because I have no other choice. But sometimes I feel like I'm not the same woman who started this dream." Keanu took a deep breath. He looked at the cup in his hands. "It's not easy," he finally said. "I've lost 2 people, parts of myself. In many ways." His voice was a whisper, but each word carried a weight that needed no explanation. Rosa understood without asking more. She set the cup down gently. The steam still rose like an invisible sigh between them. "Sometimes," she said, "I wake up in the middle of the night, and the first thing I do is look to the side of the bed, still expecting to see him. It's silly, I know." Keanu shook his head. "It's not silly, it's human." She smiled sadly. "The problem isn't that he's gone. The problem is that I stayed here, and this place, this bakery, became my way of not forgetting him. But I also became a shadow. I do everything out of habit." Keanu looked down, as if those words also pained him. "Sometimes we keep walking because we don't know what else to do. But that doesn't mean we're lost, just stuck." Rosa looked at him, surprised by the accuracy of his words. "And you?" she asked softly. "Are you stuck too?" Keanu took a while to answer. Finally, he looked. "I've spent years traveling, filming, smiling for cameras, talking to thousands of people, but sometimes I feel like I'm not talking to anyone, like I'm just moving without going anywhere." Rosa fell silent. Her eyes reflected more than understanding. They reflected a mere. "What you have here," Keanu said, "isn't just a bakery. It's memory. It's love. It's a part of you that still resists. And that, Rosa, that's worth more than anything you could lose." She nodded without speaking. Emotion tightened her chest. But for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel broken, just alive. The silence that followed was different, not awkward, but full of unspoken things that needed no words. Rosa took another sip of coffee, and let the warmth spread through her body. "You know," she said suddenly, "today I thought I was going to die. When those men came in, I felt like it was the end. But when you walked in, something changed. Not just here," she said, placing a hand on her chest. "Something changed inside me." Keanu looked at her with tenderness, not as a movie star, not as a savior, just as a man who, without intending to, had arrived at the exact right moment. "Maybe," he replied, "we both needed to be here tonight." Rosa laughed through her tears. "I never believed in coincidences." Neither did. The lights outside flickered softly, as the city surrendered to the deep silence of the early morning. The scent of coffee, the distant crackle of cooling bread, and 2 souls connected by pain but also by hope. Keanu stretched slightly in his chair. "You know, I always thought that when you help someone, you do it for them. But tonight I realize, we also do it for ourselves." "Did this help you?" Keanu took a moment to answer. "More than you can imagine." The night wore on, but neither seemed eager to break the magic between them. Rosa stood slowly and began gathering the empty cups. Keanu helped her clear the table, and for a moment, everything felt ordinary, as if what had happened hours earlier was just a bad dream. "Do you always like riding your motorcycle alone?" Rosa asked, as she rinsed the cups. "Yeah, it's the only way the noise outside matches the noise inside," Keanu replied without hesitation. She looked at him with compassion, but not pity.
There was something in the way he spoke, so direct, so honest, so human. My Carlos used to say that too, that the kitchen was his way of quieting the world. Keanu smiled. He took a towel and began drying. Maybe that's why I ended up here, to remember what silence really means. When they finished cleaning, Rosa checked the clock. It was almost the first light was beginning to seep through the curtains. I think dawn's coming, she said, and you're still awake. With you here it's hard to sleep. Keanu laughed for the first time that night. Not a polite laugh, a real one, clean. The kind that comes when the soul finally loosens. Rosa watched him. In that moment, he wasn't an actor or a hero. He was just a man, with wounds, with stories, just like her. What will you do now? Rosa asked cautiously. Keanu looked out the window. The sky was turning a pale blue. He thought for a moment. I don't know. Maybe keep riding. Maybe stay a little longer. You can come back whenever you want, she said without hesitation. There'll always be bread and coffee here, and someone to listen. Keanu looked at her with a gratitude that needed no words. Thank you, Rosa, for the coffee, for the story, and for not making me feel like a stranger. She smiled, and this time her smile hid nothing. No fear, no sadness, just a simple, genuine warmth. You never were. You were late. Late? Yes, she said, looking at him slyly. Late, but right on time. Keanu looked down, touched by her words. He stood slowly, adjusting the jacket he'd hung up hours earlier. Then I'll come back. I don't know when, but I'll come back. I'll be. They walked to the door. Keanu opened it, letting the cool morning air wash over them. Outside, the world moved on, but inside something had changed forever. Take care, Rosa. You too, son. Never forget who you are, no matter what the world tries to tell you. Keanu nodded. He got on his motorcycle, started the engine, but before leaving, he looked back at the bakery one last time. The memory of that night, etched into his. Keanu disappeared into the quiet streets, but Rosa remained standing in the doorway, watching until the motorcycle was just a distant echo. She closed the door gently, like someone closing a chapter but knowing the story wasn't over. The first light of day streamed through the window, caressing the walls of sweet memories. Rosa looked around. Everything was cleaner than ever. But it wasn't just the physical order. Something inside her had been cleansed that night, as if the dust of years of loneliness had been swept away, little by little, with every shared word. She sat alone with a reheated cup of coffee, and closed her eyes for a moment. Thank you, Carlos, she whispered to the air. I know you sent him. Hours. The first neighbors arrived. The mailman, the woman with her little boy who asked for Conscious every Tuesday. They all noticed something different about Rosa. Her smile, her energy, even her voice. They didn't ask, but they felt it. And though they didn't know it, in every piece of bread she served that morning, there was a pinch of new hope. Elsewhere in the city, Keanu parked his motorcycle on a quiet, nameless street. He took off his helmet slowly and looked at the sky. Something in him had changed, not drastically, not like in the movies where everything resolves with a single act. It was subtler, more real. He couldn't explain what had driven him to intervene that night, or why that bakery had touched him so deeply. He only knew he had done it, and that he wasn't the same anymore. Because when you save someone, sometimes you save yourself too. Days passed, then weeks. Rosa went on with her life, but something had bloomed inside her. She no longer woke up out of routine but with renewed energy. Her hands, though aged, kneaded dough with soul again. Like in the old days with Carlos. Every new customer who walked into Sweet Memories received more than bread. They received a smile that wasn't forced, a kind word that came from the heart. Even the children began lingering a little longer, sitting at the tables, listening to stories Rosa told with her warm voice. One afternoon, a young deliveryman left a box with no sender. Inside was a black leather jacket, neatly folded. In one of the pockets, a handwritten note. Rosa, in case you ever need someone to sweep up the pieces again. With love, Rosa held it to her chest, her eyes filling with tears. She didn't know when she'd see him again, but it didn't matter. He'd already left something more valuable than his presence. He'd restored her faith in the world, and in herself. Meanwhile, Keanu continued his journey, away from cameras, interviews or red carpets. What he'd experienced that night wasn't something he shared with the media or anyone else. It was his alone, his secret. His most human memory. Some nights, amid the noise of the road, he thought of Rosa, her bread, the warmth of that small place that defied time, and he smiled. because he knew that, in some corner of Los Angeles, there was a bakery where he had finally found peace. One gray morning, colder than usual, Rosa turned on the bakery's lights, and noticed something was different. The air carried a scent that hinted at change, as if life itself was about to teach her a new lesson. As she prepared the dough, someone knocked on the door, even though it wasn't opening time yet. Rosa wiped her hands on her apron, and approached. On the other side of the glass, under a black helmet, was a figure her heart recognized immediately. She opened the door without a word. Keanu took off his helmet and smiled. "I was craving bread," he said simply. Rosa didn't reply. She hugged him, not as a fan, not as a woman grateful for a gesture. She hugged him like someone welcoming a loved one home. He accepted the embrace in silence. "Coffee?" she asked after a moment. "Always." They sat at the same table by the window, as if no time had passed, and for a long while they didn't speak. There was no need. "I've been thinking," Keanu finally said. "Maybe you need a partner." Rosa raised an eyebrow, amused. "A partner? You want to be a baker? Why not?" He replied. "I'm tired of memorizing scripts. I'd rather memorize recipes." Rosa burst out laughing. "Well, you'll have to wake up at 4 a.m. I've worked with worse directors." They both laughed, but in that laughter was something more. Truth. The possibility of a new chapter. A second chance for both of them. The days that followed were a mix of flour, stories, and shared silence. Keanu didn't show up every day, but when he did, he arrived early, put on an apron, and asked what needed to be done. At first, Rosa directed him, then she just watched. There was something almost meditative about seeing this famous man place buns on a tray or clean the display case without a word. They didn't do it for business. They did it for something deep, because in those hours, in that vanilla-scented kitchen, they found what they'd been missing: purpose, meaning, humanity. Customers began to notice. Some wondered, was it him, wasn't it? But no one dared to ask. And Keanu, as if anonymity were his armor, responded only with a smile. One Sunday, Rosa caught him looking at the mural of old photos, her husband, her children, the bakery's early days. "Who's this?" Keanu asked, pointing to a young man with a mustache. "Carlos," she replied softly. "The love of my life." Keanu looked at her with respect. "I think he'd be proud of you." Rosa nodded. "And you?" "I think he'd be proud of you too." He didn't know what to say, so he just looked at her, and in that silence, they said everything again. One ordinary night, as they swept up the last traces of flour from the day, Rosa stopped in front of Keanu with a tray in her hands. "I made something new. It's not on the menu." Keanu raised an eyebrow, curious. "What is it?" "Bread of hope," she replied with a mischievous smile. He laughed. "And how do you make that?" With Scar's reclaimed laughter, and a pinch of cinnamon, they shared the bread sitting by the window, as had become their habit. Outside, the city lights twinkled like dim constellations. Inside, two souls who hadn't been looking for anything, had ended up finding everything. "I've been thinking," Keanu said, carefully breaking the bread. "I always thought healing meant forgetting, but you taught me something else." Rosa watched him without interrupting. "Healing," he continued, "isn't about forgetting. It's about remembering without the pain." She looked down for a moment, then nodded. "And keeping on baking, even when the oven's broken." They fell silent, knowing that in those simple phrases they'd summed up decades of life. "Do you think life still has surprises in store for us?" she asked, quietly. Keanu looked at her, not as an actress in a sentimental scene. He looked at her as a man, as a fellow traveler of scars, as someone who understood the price of hope. "I don't think so. I know it." And in the heart of that bakery, where time had once merely passed, something new was growing, something that had no name but had a direction. Months passed. The bakery began to change, not in its recipes or its essence, but in its energy. The walls filled with new photos, laughing children, hugging neighbors, freshly baked loaves, and among them, one, Keanu and Rosa, in white aprons, laughing with their eyes closed. One day, a young journalist passing through the neighborhood, walked in out of curiosity. She tried a concha and said between sips of coffee, "This place has magic." Rosa smiled. "It's the bread," she said, but Keanu, drying dishes in the kitchen, thought differently. The magic wasn't in the bread, it was in second chance, in souls finding each other when they least expected it. That night, Rosa wrote something in an old notebook she'd kept since Carlos died. It was the first time she'd opened it in years. On the first page she wrote, "One day I thought it was all over." But a stranger on a motorcycle with honest eyes taught me that the heart can rise again. Sometimes you don't need a happy ending, you just need a new beginning. She closed the notebook and placed it in the box where she kept her most intimate treasure. Then she turned off the lights and sat by the window. Keanu arrived minutes later with 2 coffees in hand, ready to look at the stars. Always, she replied, and while the world kept turning outside, inside that bakery, 2 broken lives continued to heal. With bread, with coffee, and with the invisible miracle of unlikely love. One rainy night, the city seemed quieter than usual. Drops tapped against the bakery's window as Rosa and Keanu stood by the oven, waiting for the last batch of bread. There was a peculiar peace between them, as if words were no longer needed to understand each other. You know, Rosa said, wiping her hands on her apron, if you'd told me a year ago that I'd end up sharing my bakery with Keanu Reeves, I'd have slammed the door in your face. Keanu laughed. And if someone had told me I'd find meaning in kneading dough with a woman who has no idea who won the last Oscar, I'd have doubted it too. Who did win? No idea, he replied. Rosa burst into laughter that echoed like music off the wall. The tray came out of the oven, and the smell filled the room. It wasn't just the scent of fresh bread, it was something more. Home, tenderness, time well spent. Keanu looked at the golden rolls and said, sometimes I think it wasn't a coincidence that I passed by that night. I don't believe in coincidences anymore, Rosa replied. I believe in disguised purposes. He nodded. Then quietly he asked, have you felt alone since then? She looked at him and with honesty in her eyes said, not since you were. In that simple exchange, without drama or embellishment, sealed something that was already alive between them. The early morning found them again at the table by the window. Outside, the lights flickered like modern fireflies, and the rain continued to fall soft. Keanu held a warm cup between his hands, and Rosa wove words with her silence. What do you see when you look at the city from here? He asked. Rosa sighed. I see the woman I was, the one who was afraid, the one who thought she had nothing left to give. And then I look around. She glanced at the bakery, and I understand I'm still alive. Keanu smiled, looked down for a moment and said, sometimes you need someone to see in you what you can no longer see. And you saw in me what I'd forgotten. And you in me, he replied, that I was still more than a shadow. The rain lessened, as if listening to their conversation. The air filled with that precious silence, shared only by people who no longer need words to fill voids. When the first ray of sunlight slipped through the clouds, Rosa stood up. Today we'll make bread of hope again, she said. Will you change the recipe? Yes, today it'll have a little more faith. Keanu laughed, and for the first time, he let that laughter stay. Life hadn't given them happy endings like in the movies, but it had given them something better, a true story. And so, in a small bakery in Echo Park, amid the crackle of bread and the silent understanding of 2 weary souls, love found its purest form, the form of staying.